And now, your feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled TIFF review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rorabeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchen.
Matt, it's TIFF, or at least as we're recording this, the eve of TIFF.
TIFF Miss Eve. You
Yep.
love it. Yeah, obviously we've talked about this in a couple other reviews that we recorded, spoilers, but my favorite time of the year, our favorite time of the year for this show, we'll be covering the entirety of the 2021 Toronto International Film Festival right here on Untitled Movie Reviews on podcast services, as well as on the Untitled YouTube channel if you want the video version of all of our reviews, so you guys can head over there. But yes, today we are reviewing Eric Warin and Tahir Rana's Charlotte, which is an animated film from Canada, Eric.
Yes, with a all-star voice cast as well, with Keira Knightley in the English dub voicing Charlotte Solomon, who is or was a painter, a German Jewish painter, at a time where World War II was on the cusp of happening, and we see that this character, as she experiences the war, but not only that, love and sort of coming of age at a time of great tragedy and fear. And I think that that's what the story is trying to convey. And then also, spoiler alerts for people that don't know Charlotte Solomon's story, is that her works, her life work, her paintings are, as it's mentioned in the post-credit scene, what would become, or what would be known as, the first graphic novel. And so
essentially she illustrated moments from her life, and if you look at them in order, it kind of paints a picture of what she experienced during this time. So a lot of people say if you put this in chronological order, it is the first graphic novel, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and again, normally when you have these true stories, the post-credit scene is
Like
usually
the postscript.
the postscript scene is usually the one that it just kind of feels like, okay, this is just excess to kind of give you, stuff that you could read on Wikipedia,
or we didn't want this to go on too long, so we need to tell you what happened.
Yeah, but I found it the opposite in this situation, where we see Charlotte's father and stepmother having survived the war back in Berlin, Germany,
in archival footage,
talking about these paintings to be the most emotionally affecting moment of the film, and that's in the last minute before the credits roll.
And do you think that disconnect comes from, just to jump right into it, that it's an animated film, or that it's an
yes
animated retelling?
And no, because there are animated movies like Graves of the Fireflies that hit you so hard emotionally that it doesn't matter.
I mean, an interesting thing, Flea, which we covered at this, which is different because it is a documentary and animation in one thing,
but it is also, and speaking just like what's going on right now in world events with Cabal and sort of, people literally fleeing for their lives and leaving Afghanistan. I think part of it is the animation style. There's something in the way that the body and the face move. It's almost like there's this weird smoothing effect on it that kind of removes you from the emotional investment that you're supposed to have in the characters. And then on top of
it's
that,
very clean looking, like with thick lines in everything, and it almost like looks digital to, like, not in a CG because it's 2D.
No, it's been enhanced though digitally. Like it's almost like with a lot of stop motion animation nowadays, where they're cutting corners by adding sort of doing the 3D printer thing by printing out multiple faces and not necessarily kind of following in the traditional footsteps in order to make a movie, because an animated film is really, really difficult to make. There are so many moving parts, and also when it comes to funding, and we were even talking about it before we recorded. This is a Canadian production, and there are a lot of smaller companies that help sort of put this thing together. So you have to, respect that a lot of work goes into something like this. But looking at it from the perspective of just a story, a narrative, I feel that it's a little too simplistic
Yeah.
and predictable in what you'd expect a prestigious drama to be. And sort of what makes it special or stand out is that it is animated, because if this was a live action film, I feel like it would be kind of a very generically told
That's what I mean.
story.
A story that, while very inspiring and important, and is something that I feel like we've seen many, many times on film. And the difference here, her, life being a painter and finding her paintings and it becoming, the first ever graphic novel, I think is an interesting tidbit to go, okay, let's make this into an animated film. But I agree with you that it is very simplistic in its storytelling and very linear. And then I had some issues with kind of the time jumps throughout the movie as well, where I feel like we have these little snippets of her life, because essentially they're kind of adapting each painting that she's kind of, not each one, but different ones from her life, where they show you a moment or an important moment in her coming of age that I felt like it jumped around almost too much, to the point where it started to get a little confusing to me, even though it was very simple and linear, that how long we would stay in a time period and how far they would jump ahead and which moments got a big there's some moments in the movie where there's like a big animated transition where it would actually show her paintings full screen that are kind of being digitally almost like uploaded, right? Like into completion.
It almost looks like
And
water paintings or something like that. Like you
yeah.
put like a piece of paper over top of the image, but like it's like coming into focus, or like
To
it's
me, it almost took like, if you're familiar with Photoshop or other things like that, like they almost split her paintings up into layers, and they would like fade in the layers on top of each other until one of her paintings were complete, and then there would be a time jump after that. So they were almost used as like segment, like breaks in each segment, and then there would be a title card that says, sometimes it would be a date and sometimes it would say 3 months later. So like I felt like there wasn't a consistency in how it was portrayed or laid out, that I could completely go, all right, why did that one get an animated transition and say X amount of months later, but then that one didn't, and then it said a date, and then like, your frame of reference is everyone's familiar with World War II and kind of the time period that it took place in. But I feel like it didn't do a great job with how it was laid out to kind of have that flow of time. Does that make sense?
yeah, and also where it sort of pinpoints moments, because some of those transitions, it can be, months or years, but then other times it can be like a few days or a few
Yeah.
weeks. And I know that, like, again, it's chronicling a life lived, but it's doing so in a way that kind of feels like it's taking away from not only those moments but from the transitions. Like the transitions don't necessarily have that great of an impact when you're doing it for like, okay, 3 weeks later from this
Yeah.
previous event that's kind of key to the character. And then also, like, I think some of the voice cast takes me out of the movie a little bit,
I
especially with
agree
Keira Knightley, because
completely.
like when Keira Knightley's character says that she's just a German Jewish girl trying to live her dream in a time of war, it's like you have a British actor whose voice is her voice. It's a British accent. It feels a little bit weird. And I know that, like, that's maybe nitpicking, considering like a lot of World War II movies have always had British actors playing German and stuff like that. But like for
Especially being a
this,
Canadian production, so they made it in English and French. But like I'm totally with you that like it does take me out of it a bit when things in the background are in German and you'll have translations come on screen, but everyone is speaking English. Some people with German accents, some people not, some with English accents and different things like that. When you have a Canadian production with UK actors and stuff like that, that it's just like it it just threw me out of it, and I would have preferred it to all be in German or something and cast great German actors and have it subtitled or something like that, that like, or at least maybe a third version if they're doing a French and English version. Like if you really, because I know Disney's done it with the Studio Ghibli movies and different things like that, there's always an English dub of an animated film because
and
it's
there is a
very,
French dub here
yeah,
with
yeah.
Marion Cotillard doing the Charlotte
But
character
then
in
that's
the
what I
French
mean of
dub.
like, why didn't not focus on a German and French, because some of it takes place in France as well.
Yeah.
That why not do that version and then have an English and French version, if and give people the choice. But the original version, I believe, should be in. Yeah, and it's my pet peeve even in other World War II movies like you just mentioned too. Like I just really I don't like when just everyone speaks English just because it's easier for audiences that way. And I just feel like that's kind of a cop out a little bit. And I feel like, and maybe it turns some people off because they don't want to read subtitles and things like that. But then with an animated movie, I feel like you could have easily, I know it's, a small Canadian film and maybe you don't have the budget to do that. And you got to focus on who your audience is going to be, which is mostly French and English Canadians.
And also getting people to see the film, because if you have
Yeah.
Keira Knightley's name on the poster or like, advertising her as one of the stars, that is a draw. But
feel
you
like you could have
mentioned
got a German actress
Flea
that,
though.
yeah,
And that's another perfect example where that is not an English speaking documentary. Like that's taking a risk, but it's doing so. And there are rumors that there is an option for an English dub with Riz
which I'm
Ahmed,
fine with, to give people the option to make it more accessible. But your original version, I think, especially when you're telling, an important story about a German Jewish girl, that like have a German do the voice for it, and like, or it be in German to be faithful to her story, where I feel like you're kind of, I don't know. I'm totally with you that it's distracting throughout the whole thing, I think.
Yeah, I think the best stuff in the film, you already mentioned it, that a lot of the second half of the movie takes place in the south of France, where Charlotte goes to live with her grandparents, and you have Jim Broadbent, who is, again, it's a very kind of hammy performance, but at the same time, what I like about the character is he's not a very nice man, but at the same time, you empathize that he's lost a lot over his life, and that part of it is due to mental illness within his wife's side of the family, and having experienced so much loss. And that's another thing that I also do think is interesting, that it does tackle mental illness from the perspective of old age, and I think that
Yeah.
that's something that's not really talked about a lot in
In this
terms
time
of,
period as well,
yeah, in
too.
terms of like a stigma in general, mental illness, but especially in older generations, because it's just like, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with me, or it's just better left unsaid. But the relationship that Charlotte has with her grandfather is one that is not, you think, okay, like in your classic stories, like there's going to be some sort of moment of
Reconciliation.
reconciliation,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and it never gets there, and I think that that's the
It
strongest
goes to
stuff in
some
the
darker
film.
spots, which you wouldn't necessarily. I mean, obviously, it was a dark time period, and some awful, awful things happen, and that's represented in the movie. But like you said, when it touches on mental illness and stuff like that, it went to some areas that I wasn't expecting, and I think that's good. In the movie, tackles that head on, and I think does a pretty good job at that. And like, I don't think there's necessarily like, we had some things of the voice cast, and maybe the animation wasn't our favorite and things like that, but the movie itself is mostly, perfectly serviceable. Like it's totally fine. I don't think it's awful or anything. It's just, I think it's a, um, pardon the pun, but paint by numbers kind of World War II sort of biopic kind of thing, where there's nothing egregious there, but I don't think it did anything to necessarily go, oh, you got to see this.
Yeah, I'm completely on the same page with you, and it's one of those movies where you do root for it, because this is a story that is emotionally devastating at the end of the day, but you feel it
Yeah,
the most in that postscript sort of
with the
archival
real life
footage
footage.
reveal, and
Yeah.
ultimately what happens to Charlotte, and you know where the story's going, especially mentioning the frame of reference with the historical aspect. And when you get there in the narrative that's being told in this animated movie, you still again don't feel it as much as you do with the text telling you what happened. Like when that moment happens with the text in the photo, and the fate of the character, the fate of the person, that's the moment where you just have that deep breath of, we lost,
Yeah,
like imagine what the world would have been like if she was still around, and
totally. Yeah.
what a shame it is that like her and so many people were eradicated and wiped off the face of the earth.
Hmm.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, again, you want to really appreciate the film, and especially with its praising of the work, but I almost feel like the work itself is still more interesting than the film depicting the author.
I agree. No, I totally agree. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. Like I think it's perfectly okay, but it didn't do anything more than that for me.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also going to give it a 3. I think it's perfectly fine. I think there will be a lot of people that will like the film. I think it is
Yeah,
very accessible. Again, maybe with the exception of the animation, because I can see some people looking at just the animation in general and saying like, oh, I'm just not interested in animated movies as a normal thing. Some
hmm
people look at an animated movie, and even if it's a film that is dealing with drama that's not for kids, they still call it a cartoon. This is
yeah.
not a kids movie. It's
No,
not
no, no.
it's not vulgar or
I think a
disturbing in that
kid,
way.
you could show it to a
Yeah.
kid if I mean, there's some dark stuff in there, but I don't think that there's anything they shouldn't watch. But yeah, I definitely agree with you there. But okay. Thank you all for listening or watching. Eric and I will be covering basically as much as we possibly can over the next couple of weeks at the Toronto International Film Festival. So you can get all those reviews over on podcast services, on Untitled Movie Reviews, or right here on YouTube, on the Untitled YouTube channel. If you want a one-stop shop for all of our reviews, all of our social channels, all of the YouTube videos, everything, head over to our Letterboxd HQ, where we post everything over there. So it's Untitled_movies over on Letterboxd. You literally just go there and you'll find everything you need for our channel. As always, my name is Matt Rorabeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rorabeck.
And I'm Eric Marchen. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Stay tuned for more TIFF reviews.
Cheers, everyone.